And I always remember wanting to dress more elaborately. I remember my mother taking me to Cole Brothers in Sheffield, and it was that time at which I was complaining to my mother that I didn't very much like the clothes she was buying for me. And so she got tired of it at one point and pointed out the materials at the large bolts of fabric and said, look, hypothetically speaking, if you could have customized clothing, obviously she didn't use those exact words, it was long ago, I'm paraphrasing, hypothetically speaking, what fabrics would you choose? And I went right to this bolt of some sort of shiny blue silk or satin or something, and pointed to it and said, this looks quite nice. He said, that's actually the material they use to make girls' bridal wedding dress type things. And I'm like, well, it looks shiny, and I like shiny and pretty, and I don't think I use the term pretty. I like shiny, and it's nice. You know? A lot of the things that I would have liked to have done, ways I would have liked to have expressed myself, I never could, because it didn't fit with a male stereotype. And actually, a lot of guys at Infest just end up wearing the girls' clothing. It looks kind of odd because it isn't cut for their shape. Um, but I guess if you want to express yourself, that's what you do in Infest. It's almost like a language, you know. Your choice of clothing says things about you, and that's why it really should be your choice and not a uniform. Your message shouldn't be sanitized to be socially acceptable. And it seems to me that there's a much narrower range of what's socially acceptable for men. It's not socially acceptable for a man to wear clothing that says, I like pretty things, or um, I don't know, or that says, I think my body's worth showing off, and therefore, girls, I'm showing it off. Why don't you come over here if you're interested? Because men are supposed to be the instigators, the initiators in intersexual, intergender relationships. So a man putting himself on show that way is a bit socially unacceptable. They're supposed to hide what they've got. If you notice, most men's clothing covers up a lot, and it's designed to hide the male shape underneath it quite a lot. These broad-shouldered suits that take away the roundness of the human shoulder, these um, baggy jeans, baggy t-shirts, well, baggy compared to women's that are designed to hug every curve they have. I guess the difference between some women's clothing and some men is men are not allowed to say, I want to put my natural shape on display because, I don't know, I'm not proud of it, or I don't like the statement that that makes about me and what I think my relationship to other people should be, or because it distracts from the fact that I think that I need to be representing myself as something less personal, less approachable, perhaps even less warm, less human. Uniforms do sometimes have the effect of making people seem dehumanized. They can seem impersonal, seem threatening. Speaking of dehumanization and uniforms, there was an EDL protest today, over the weekend, which was supposed to be potentially a big cause of trouble for Bradford, and to be honest, it has been, and in the wrong way, because basically the police have shown that they don't understand really how to resolve problems without resorting to dirty tactics. Basically, as I understand it, the EDL held one of their marches, one of their racist marches, as I think most people would be happy calling them. Maybe if not planned to be a racist march, then certainly in the execution and the way their supporters and members behave themselves, a racist march. And they actually had a static protest because their march was banned. And stupidly, the anti-protest was right there next to it, and at one point they tried to make a break for the anti-protest and started chucking things, bricks, smoke bombs, so forth, and the police boxed them in. And then they did something very stupid. They started using tear gas on them. Now, I understand why the police needed to move with great speed and why they needed to be forceful. And I understand why it's important to keep the two crowds apart. However, when you're basically using tear gas on a large boxed-in crowd, what you're saying is, we want you to submit. We don't want you to just be peaceable. We want you to submit. We want to hammer you till you can't get up and fight anymore. It doesn't matter if you were a peaceful protester among a violent crowd. We don't want you to be able to stand on your feet without staggering. We don't want you to go anywhere. We don't want the crowd to disperse. We want you to be neutralized as threats to our city. And that's what they were really worried about. That's why they boxed them in. They were worried about the protest actually breaking up. Tear gas is supposed to be used to disperse crowds, not to beat them into submission. And actually, they weren't allowed to disperse. That's what the police were afraid of. They were afraid of all these protesters breaking up and going into town to find the local pub and coming out drunk. And local Asian kids, probably kids, see these drunk racist guys going around, mostly racist, and someone does something stupid on either side, a fight breaks out, and before you know it, the Muslims are rioting in Bradford again. And the police were dreadfully afraid of this, but you don't get to curtail people's right to freedom of movement and basically tear gas them till all they want to do is get back onto a coach instead of go into the city centre for a pleasant drink, just because you're afraid of the repercussions of a few stupid individuals. If you're really afraid of the repercussions of a few stupid individuals, you need to have a huge police presence in the city centre to deal with that when it occurs. That way, you can maintain people's basic human rights and at the same time deal with any issues before they escalate into riot. And that is it, really. The police failed to do that. They acted out of fear, and in so doing they did abuse people's human rights, their right to movement, their right not to freedom of movement, their right not to be punished for things they haven't done. And I'm sure no matter how racist and violent you think most of the EDL are, but somewhere in that crowd there were peaceful protesters who did suffer considerably because the police chose to box them in and tear gas them. And that just seems sad and wrong to me.